That's the ad, isn't it, for Hamlet cigars? You know, the old one where the guy has to take passport photos,
Oh,
and
yes,
when
yes,
Oh,
back
he's
in the
it's
like,
classic.
90s.
and every time he takes the shot, it like sort of, kind of goes down, or like it when he's really far forward, and then yeah, it's a classic. I don't know who wrote it. That I think AMV had the account, didn't they?
The immediate suspect for posting such things is usually Paddy Gilmore, who has his
Yeah.
humor in advertising newsletter, which is quite good.
That roller skates one as well. You know, the roller skates in, is it Reno or something? Have you seen that one? It's very 90s. And it's like, don't do crack, roller skate or something. Have you seen that one? That's hilarious.
No, I haven't seen that
Is
one.
that a real thing?
Yeah, it
Yeah.
was a real, like, one of those like local TV ads that just go really harebrained. It was like one of those really low productions. Is like, don't do crack, guys. Like, don't eat candy. Come and roller skate. And this guy's offering, like, promoting his roller skate rink in like Reno, Nevada. Like, it's the funniest thing ever. I'll have to link it to you afterward. Just go to YouTube and watch it. It's
Yeah.
like, it's the best.
How big a deal was that Brian Chesky thing? I mean, you said it was all over your LinkedIn. I mean, I saw it
Okay.
a bit, but I didn't.
It's so I mean, I talked about this like maybe a year and a half ago, but it's something I observed way before that, is that in startups, generally when Uri, you said very eloquently, early on when there's less competitors, a bit more white space, you can kind of get away with being a bit more product orientated, going in, taking a loss if things don't work out, and sort of being
Yeah.
a bit more product led.
And more sales focused because there's just so much white space. You're just kind of like converting. You're not worried about demand. You only start worrying about demand where that kind of like sales slows down and the category becomes more crowded. And then
Yeah.
startups discover marketing.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's exactly what's happened to Airbnb, right? I think, there's been a couple of headwinds, like the funding environment. Obviously, as interest rates have gone up, the cost of funding and debt has gone up. So therefore, there's an increased need to show positive unit economics very quickly. So a lot of startups are having to pivot from like a growth mindset to a profitable growth or profit mindset, which has been a big change. And then I think secondarily, some of the yields from some of these preferred mediums that they were used to using to get this demand and customer acquisition, like Facebook direct response, Google direct response, SEO content. A lot of the yields from those have plummeted and the price has gone up, obviously. So therefore, that's really stressed out their customer acquisition cost. So they've had to think beyond those immediate channels to like bigger things. And I think, was it last year or year before, they were talking about investing in brand instead of Google search ads instead, and it's like
Mm-hmm.
this big thing, and like everyone in marketing was like, yeah, well, duh, I told you so. And then like basically a year later, he's on Lenny Revitsky's podcast. Now Lenny used to be one of the product managers at B&B, and he's got this very famous podcast that's in part of the Andreessen Horowitz A16Z sort of network, along many other podcasters that are famous. He's had a lot of success and has like millions of downloads, and he's kind of like very big in the SaaS or tech community, especially product managers. And yeah, so it's just been a very big change from, he interviews basically Brian Chesky, the CEO of Airbnb, again a couple of days ago, and basically Brian just describes hiring the ex-marketing head of comms at Apple, some Japanese guy, I forget his name, and then also Johnny Ives, who used to be the lead designer at Apple, and basically have changed the whole culture away from product manager, engineering-led sort of culture to more of a marketing-led culture with what they call product PMMs, or product marketing managers, at sort of the top, and made some pretty controversial statements around the ability for product managers and their existing role to be effective in the new environment. And anyway, so it was just very interesting what comes out of that. But again,
Yeah.
basically TLDR, he discovered marketing.
But I also think he's still, when you can like hear about, when you hear things he's been talking about lately, he's still very much also talking to the investment community when he talks about things like experience, or he talks about kind of like, that AI purchase that they've made. It's always going to be like that. I think tech is different in the sense that it always has to keep promising big disruptions that open up completely new categories and scalability, and just a lot of the promising goes back to that. But that's
Yeah.
also marketing, isn't it?
Investor relations, yeah, that's a big part
Right?
of I
Yeah,
think where startups get their bad rap from is
yeah.
like
I
the
mean,
ability to like sell the
yeah,
new dream.
yeah. Demand for stocks is also building demand.
It's one man, two governors. Essentially, like if you're in the tech scene, there's two governors. There's your audience, the people that you're trying to attract the attention of, and then there's the investors. And I think it's going to be ever thus. Well, it certainly has been. It'd be interesting to see what kind of shakes out post global recessionary times where the price of credit has skyrocketed and price of debt, what that does to the investment community and how they invest, and the relationships that startup or the tech scene has with its investment community. I think it's been pretty solid and fairly unchanged for the last 10, 15 years.
Yeah. What do you think, Baiba?
I feel very disconnected from this conversation.
Aww.
Okay, you'll tell us something that's been interesting that's happened in the last
we
week
can
or
use
two.
my New York trip as a hook to talking about in-house creative and brief templates. My God, people are obsessed with the template as if they're not all the same or it's not always about the content. Terrible.
Baiba, you're like a historian, or not a librarian, like historian. Like you care about the provenance of different frameworks, whether they be briefing frameworks or strategy frameworks.
I mean, at the moment, I think that I have gone too much into the past, that I have also observed and did a lot of these interviews with strategists about how they are doing the strategy currently. And I think that I need to move into the next step to kind of figure out like what could be like, I don't know, the vision for the planning or how the planning could look like after like, I don't know, 3 to 5 years.
Well, since we last talked, I was connected with an acquaintance of someone I respect in the UK, and he's very big in the AI community. Anyway, he connected me with someone, and we've been creating a qualitative research product, mostly for tech, but it can be used for qual interviews as well, like one-on-one interviews around discovery. So obviously, Baiba, when some planners start their process, they may start with some sort of discovery-based, qualitative research, as well as looking at secondary research and asking some experts in the area. And obviously, that qualitative research process is very time-consuming. If you do it properly as well, you're talking to hard to reach people at length, and then having to synthesize their answers into something, and then mine lots of data, read between the lines, and pull out little nuggets that you can use. And sometimes the smallest details that come out in these conversations can be like the thing that is the impetus behind your whole approach for the strategy for this client. And what I was trying to do with this guy is create a framework that makes that whole thing easier, using LLMs or AI to synthesize and do that hard searching, but at very high quality, better than a human can, which is difficult to design. And then pull out those little nuggets, and then the human filters those nuggets into things that are probably feasible and viable for that account. I think that would be a really cool tool for strategists.
I think that it was to you, Uri. The stage is yours.
Oh, sorry, I have someone at the door.
Oh, that's nice.
Playing hard to get.
I mean, like it can be interesting, and I think that there would be a lot of people who would value a lot of, like, they would get a lot of gain out of it. I think that in my case, I have done these qualitative interviews on my own, some kind of like based on my own interest. It hasn't been like, oh, this is like a proper research project. It was more like I'm trying to test my own skills, how I can interview people and all that stuff. I have also worked for projects. For example, I use my qualitative interview skills in the project with Paul and the team.
One of my pet peeves about marketing, and it has been my pet peeves like almost since joining the industry proper. I actually wrote about it, but you know how they say that the things that make you fall in love with someone then are also become the things that annoy you about that someone, right? If they're, I don't know, very carefree, then with time you just wish that sometimes they could be serious or things like that. And I think it's for me like that with marketing, and it has been quite a long affair between me and marketing. But one of the things is that on one hand, when I joined marketing, I also quit whatever was left from my academic career at the time. I was supposed to get a PhD, and I chose marketing because it was more dynamic and more exciting, and because I really liked the fact that you didn't have to engage with 20 years of arguments or hundreds of years of arguments every time you had a good idea, or had to write 20 pages of footnotes every time you had a good idea. Marketing seemed to be this magpie discipline that steals all the good ideas from all the other disciplines and just uses whatever works. And that was very exciting for me, the idea that if I had a good idea, instead of writing 20 pages of footnotes, I could just prove that idea over 3 PowerPoint slides, and it works for me, it works for the client, and lo and behold, a couple of months later, I see it working in the market. The way that gets then flipped over into a pet peeve is you realize very quickly that one of the biggest drawbacks to our discipline, the practitioner side of the discipline, is that there's very little sense of history. All the frameworks, all the ideas, with the exception of a few true celeb ideas, they like come out of nowhere. They were made up by no one. And agencies constantly, I think brand frameworks are a great example, because every creative agency will take some kind of a jumble chimera of old networks, relabel them randomly. Well, not randomly. They always try to be thoughtful about it, but the increasing mutation of the idea is almost impossible to avoid. And a very simple example for that is the get who to buy framework, where so many people just call it get to buy, and therefore there's even an increased chance that there will be no insight in the way they capture creative strategy. So, and that's why I've always thought it's very important to have practitioners with a sense of history. And Baiba is a rare example for that, because she's a practitioner with a real sense of history, and she would be quite relentless about it. She will go and start digging up, where did it come from? Where did it start?
Well, can I tell a fun fact? I did this creative strategy framework session where I explained, like, the history of the frameworks a little bit, like, what's the oldest one, and kind of like new versions of the frameworks. And there was one guy who sent me a direct message, and he was like, how can you use these frameworks if you don't invite these guys into the room and ask for their permission, or that they could show these frameworks? For example, Stephen King. And I was like, dude, that guy is dead. Like, how can I invite him in the room? And I understood that this person doesn't understand the history at all. And then this guy told me that he is training strategists in Toronto in creative strategy. And I was like, what the hell are you training if you don't know the history? At least know Stephen King and Stanley Pollitt, the godfathers of the discipline.
So what's happening in your world, Paul? By the way, I was watching, was it Netflix or one of the streaming apps, and I saw Boiling Point has a new series. Is that a spin-off from that thing that you were involved in?
Yes.
Yeah.
Wow.
It was a 4-part series. So when we made the film, we were then nominated for 4 BAFTAs, and then off the back of those 4 BAFTA nominations, the BBC got in touch, and discussions were had around making a series out of it. And so then BBC bought the rights to make a 4-part series that went live. So that was in October on the BBC. It was given what is called, so it's on Sunday evenings at 9:00 on BBC One, which is called like the Downton Abbey slot. It's like the slot on British TV.
Wow.
And so, so that was every Sunday night for 4 Sundays in a row. And then I think now the plan is they will then, the way that the BBC is able to make money as a public broadcaster is they then sell that to other channels across the world. So it'd be sold to a channel, hopefully a channel in the US, a channel, in Australia, wherever, and hopefully the Boiling Point roller coaster continues.
Wow. So do you earn, are you allowed to say, like, what was your involvement at the beginning? Was it production or? So,
on the film, I'm listed, I've got a credit as an exec producer. So
okay.
It's been like, in terms of the first film I've ever got involved in, it literally took
pretty well.
It's still it's still newsworthy now. I mean, I got involved in the project in 2020. So I got involved in like February 2020, and it's still, it's still kind of banging the drum, and it gives me stuff to talk about, and people reference it. And so in terms of a first project to be involved in, it literally couldn't have been any better, which is amazing.
So I've always wanted to ask, what does an exec producer do?
That's what everyone asks. Because it's a pretty loose title.
It's like a board member, I think.
Exactly like that. It's almost like a board member or like a non-exec. You kind of get involved as much as you want, really, and as much as the team that are making it feel like they want your involvement. To be an exec producer, you have to invest. So there's a level of investment that comes, that's your primary role, is to invest in the project. In the same way that you would have like a board made up of non-execs, they all kind of bring something like a different like lens or a different set of skills. So that's kind of, I think that's a good analogy, really. But film is a really difficult thing to make money in. It's incredibly difficult. What's the old adage? If you've got a large fortune, open a restaurant and you'll soon have a small fortune. I think it's the same. It's the same with film. It's one of the quickest ways. It's one of the quickest ways to lose money.
Hey, you know what I found out? I was doing some research around brand and ATL, BTL, like above the line, below the line, and I found out that the film industry uses the same terminology for people like exec directors and some more of the senior, less hands-on staff that are involved in a film are called above the line, and then below the line are basically all the run-of-the-mill sort of like workers that produce the film, the actors, and everyone else. Is that? Do you use that terminology? I've always wondered.
I've never used that in film. Obviously, I use it day to day for advertising, but I've never used it in film.
Well, apparently that's where it was an old thing from Hollywood, and so when I was doing that research into brand and like where does this dichotomy come from with a more mass media sort of TVC production, it came from because when you're making TVCs back in the 50s and 60s, you were basically tapping into film studios and the networks they had to produce these things. It was very technically difficult, and I think some of the mimetic sort of effect of using that terminology sort of transpired over into P&G at the time, who started to use these terms as an accounting treatment, and that sort of like flowed in from there, and it still affects us today in terms of like when you say ATL, everyone thinks, okay, that's a big video production, nice shoot, mass media, TV spots, Super Bowl, like that's instantly what comes to mind. And if you say anything in BTL, they're kind of like, oh, well, that's point of sale and I don't know, Google search and stuff like that. Like they lump them all in together, but it's a term that's very old. It sort of shouldn't kind of be used anymore, but still does.
I love that. I love how there were these, it's a little bit what we're talking about with the frameworks, like these hidden fingerprints from history that people just don't realize that like we use language that without knowing the provenance of it. I've become weirdly obsessed. There's an Instagram handle that I've now follow that's all about the history of London. I know, obviously, like as a Brit, why would I not be interested in London? But yeah, and it's all about like tiny little things about the history of London that have been preserved that now everyone kind of ignores, and you have to be a bit of a historian to know that this little alleyway that everyone walks past was once, the most famous or most influential alleyway in London, or whatever it is. I love stuff like that.
Even just the name itself, like, was a Latin word, Londinium. It was like a Roman city.
Yeah.
In a swamp.
In a swamp, yeah.
And hey, the other thing I learned about London, I was talking to a pricing expert, and he said the fire of London, I forget, when is this, the 1500s or like ages ago, 1200s, or I don't know, long time ago. The ferry people across the Thames would ferry people from one side to the other, when the whole place is burning down, and they would actually use surge pricing based on how severe the fire was and the proximity to the boats. So like when Uber came out and like, hey, we're using dynamic surge pricing, I'm like, nah, that's from the 1200s. Like, London did that ages ago, on the Thames. Isn't that cool?
But of course, they might have been the people that if you owned the ferry, you could have started the fire in the bakery. You kind of create.
Ooh, now you're talking.
Yeah, some underhand tactics.
I thought you were taking this into the question of concepts that refuse to die, because I understand there was a lot of discussion about EA old marketing funnel in the
Ooh,
last few
yes.
weeks. So,
Ooh.
what was the LinkedIn discussion about the?
Okay. So, because I mean, this is a framework, right? That was created in 1898 or something, but it sort of stems from this AIDA model, which was attention, interest,
Mhm,
desire,
mhm.
action, which was an old model that was created by it was to train salespeople for door-to-door sales. And then it's sort of been bastardized over the years to be adopted in some agencies around attention, interest, desire, action, i.e. everything starts with, awareness, interest, desire, action. And it was all about justifying building awareness prior to a sale occurring using Marcoms, right? And that's kind of not where it comes from, even though it was very convenient. So I just sort of pointed out to some people that over the years it has been sort of taken perhaps out of context. And ironically, the people who advocate for awareness, interest, desire, action, generally advertising people, they do that saying that you need to build awareness before a sale, when ironically it was created by salespeople to sell.
I think the thing about marketing funnels is that they are much more bespoke than people realize. People kind of like are trying to find this generic solution, but it's just not the way marketing funnels work. The whole point of a funnel is mapping the journey that is specific to your brand and your category and figuring out how that works, doing a lot of quant and qual along the way. And then, if you're lucky and everything has worked well, you kind of figure out where exactly are your levers for investment, for activity, and then you can start having impact. And I think on top of that, there's a lot of interesting research. So there was this is really one of my favorite pieces of research from the last couple of years that Google did about the how do
Messy
they call
middle.
it? The messy middle, um, which has just huge implications for brands. It's a fascinating piece of research. So it's interesting because a lot of the critiques about the funnel are that it's not that linear. And in messy middle, Google kind of like really proves with data and other things that yes, it's not quite that linear. And actually, I think exploration and consideration tend to almost like happen in tandem. And I like that because I like things that happen in tandem a little bit, like, where to play and how to win, two questions, kind of like in tandem, guiding strategy. But the thing is that to understand it, or to practically work on it, you still have to sometimes pretend, kind of like a willing suspension of disbelief, and pretend that it's linear in order to be able to look at things side by side. What I liked probably the most about the messy middle was not just how messy the middle was the importance of this. I mean, I don't remember if they shy away from calling it awareness, but there's this, ambient presence and goodwill to build for a brand before the funnel can start working. And I just thought it was terrific to get that from Google, because this is the world's, like, the best thing for Google would be that this ambient awareness didn't matter, that it
Yeah.
was all this kind of like immediate digital funnel that a lot of performance marketing was trying for a while to pretend exists. And then you suddenly had like the one company that probably had the most to gain from things being like that, going, well, actually, you really have to build awareness for the whole funnel to even work. And that just felt, oh, it's marketing again. It's like the
Well,
world's shittiest game of Cluedo.
there's a bit more
Marketing in the library with the funnel.
there's a bit more story to that. What happened, I've written about this, is like the performance marketing sort of channels, if you want to label them that, like Facebook and Google, have realized that once they run out of their very high quality, high buyer intent inventory in the advertising system, right? Very small
Yeah.
portion of the market. We know it's like, what, 99% other people that are out of market, 1% in, or, varying degrees of that. They figured out that if you want to make more money, you have to increasingly sell advertising services that cover the other 90% of the out market people. And that's where you make the bulk of your revenue. So they've all figured out that they've exhausted all this. And this has been very synonymous. The timing of that thing was very synonymous with what they did in the back end, where they changed the attribution of the words that you type in. So they started obscuring 20 to 40 to now 50% of your budget, so you don't know where 50% of your budget is going. And they say, oh, don't worry about that because it's building brand, and that's the excuse they're using now. And Meta have done the same thing. They're doing it under the pretense of privacy, but it's actually self-serving in the fact that it actually ends up costing you more money. There's probably some method to it, but it's also a really sneaky way of selling junk inventory at scale under the pretense of building brand.
Yeah, I mean, another related irony to that piece of research is that, of course, it came out very early in the pandemic.
Yeah.
So it came out exactly during a period where suddenly all marketing funnels had this irregular spike that, of course, many people were immediately quick to say, oh, it will last forever. It will last forever. And of course, it didn't.
Yeah. You know, one of the things that I've always thought about marketing funnels, and I know there's like a gazillion of them. One of the things that's interesting about them, though, is that because they are vertical and like, you know, getting narrower, whichever kind of model, it gives the impression that there's a gravitational pull, that someone can drop from like one level to the next level. And of course, that suggests there's some sort of inherent propulsion or pull or something that can take someone through, you know, down through a funnel, which of course that's not necessarily the case. You know, the public are walking around being irrational, you know, and selfish and self-serving and not going in the direction. They probably even walk around in circles, like, you know, like the infinity loop of the messy middle, or they might even just try and climb back up, you know, and the funnels don't necessarily account for those things. Although to the point that Uri made, I really like. So I completely agree that every brand has its own funnel in inverted commas. You know, that they are all bespoke to the brand and the category that it operates in, and all those types of things. The one that the example that I saw recently was the one from Stolly. So the CMO, I can't remember their name, the CMO at Stolly, the vodka, you know, like classic. I'm sure there's a bit of reverse engineering that it's in the shape of a cocktail shaker, but I thought it was a really neat way to kind of distill down their funnel, and they've clearly thought about it because it looks
distill down, still
down, yeah. But it's like it's not even really kind of funnel shaped. It's got like odd, like weird bits in it, you know, like it kind of it's not a linear shape.
So, Baiba, I want to hear your take on this. Just before, I agree with you, Paul, in terms of I think that the danger of having this sort of upended pyramid is that they think that more at the top will lead to proportionally more at the next stage and down. And I notice there's lots of disproportionality in that. And that's where I think people make the mistake. They go, okay, go more top of funnel. That will lead to bottom of funnel. But especially with smaller brands and challenger brands who are not dominant in the market, that is not the case. Those raw ratios do not apply. And there's a lot of disproportionality. So you can make, you know, big bets on, you know, upper funnel, and that does not translate down to bottom funnel sales. And that's the thing I always teach people, like just be really care of those causal steps between the layers of however you build it, because you want to be very sure that applies like mathematically before you go and do that. And yeah, anyway, Baiba, what do you think?
I have a question more to you guys, like why there was this kind of big kind of buzz around this I think his name is Dan White's post, because there were like, I don't know, hundreds of comments, and everybody tried to kind of express their opinion that, you know, he's not right and they are correct about the way how the funnel should need to be used. And I was just a little bit surprised, like, you know, why can't he kind of, you know, publish the way he thinks about these funnels?
Yeah, I think
because that is my kind of impression.
Is this your first time Is this your first time on social media, by the way?
No, I mean, like, you guys posted on our group chat, like, you know, like, hey, this is like a conversation that has been like a hot topic like the past week, and I was like, yeah, but you know, what's so special about this conversation? Someone who is like, you know, writing books.
I mean, the fact that this is a testimony to Dan's success, because people absolutely love the way he captures things graphically. So his posts get disproportionate, well-deserved, I underline, well-deserved disproportionate attention. And that's why they have the power to tip over critical mass and reignite old arguments. That's all.
Yeah, some folks just got like more likes to their comments than the author itself, and I was just surprised, like what's going on, like why there is some kind of like a court, public court to this author on social media, on LinkedIn. Now
Well, I
I
think
got it.
anytime you see controversy in and lots of like comments, generally that's indicative of everyone kind of being right to an extent, and there being no clear answer. And I find that's the interesting stuff because, and like you said, Uri, at the beginning, I think it's indicative of the fact that everybody has their own sort of funnel and their own opinion on it, and that's causing this, like, there is no one funnel. So when someone tries to create this like funnel to rule them all, like Lord of the Rings, inevitably if people go, no, it doesn't work like that because my funnel works like this. So I think it's going to prove our point at the beginning of the discussion to a certain extent.
Yeah, but I can say like we did this survey about the strategy models, both in creative strategy and also in brand strategy. And we are now talking in the depths about the different type of funnels and the meaning of the funnels. I can tell you honestly from the research findings that people are positioning brands with get who to buy model, which is kind of, I would, my apologies, say a little bit ridiculous, but that's what I can see based on the survey findings, that's one of the most common used framework model for brand positioning. And then we are talking in a depth about the different type of funnels. I would say that majority of the audience may not even go that deep.
Just this past week in New York, I was teaching this framework, and I referred to it as the framework that ate advertising. And I think it's mostly the biggest amount of damage. I think it's in the UK, but it's also quickly spreading. The idea that someone would use that framework as a positioning framework.
So which framework are we talking about?
I despair.
Get who to buy. Usually, like nowadays, they are referring to this newer version, which is get to buy. They are just skipping the aspect of who or element of who out, or they are combining get and who together. But the original one was get who to buy model, which was created for BPDO.
How can you remove who?
So originally, it's kind of like it's get audience, who audience insight, and so on. So I mean, usually when the who is dropped, you can kind of start suspecting that what you're gonna see, and usually that's what you see, is that they will specify the audience without adding any kind of insight. And I mean insight in the broadest sense possible. Let's not fall into that debate. Oh dear, positioning, my word.
What do you guys think about positioning?
This is the part that maybe we can stop record.
What do we think about positioning? Are we just what is it? Is this some kind of exposure therapy we're doing here today? It's like we're just gonna dig up
I
all
actually
the
don't
most
know.
painful concepts in marketing.
Well, I don't know your actual personal views on this. Sorry, I haven't looked into it, but this comes up a lot in early stage startups. They go because the new iteration of positioning is like, hey, we want to be a category creator. We want to create our own category, which is kind of like I say it's a sort of a remix of positioning and blue ocean strategy. You know, it's a new iteration. And I was like, you want to create your own category? I'm like, it sounds like a lot of hard work. And then they're like, isn't this just positioning? Like, what are you guys talking about? Yeah, anyway, I found positioning always very fluffy and sort of self-serving in a way and not very valid. But I don't know. What do you guys think?
Baiba, you want to start by just giving some general outline and background to the different concepts out there, or?
No, I mean, like,
because I'm just gonna rant angrily.
I mean, like, I will give you the floor because I will be just honest. Like, there was like one of my posts that there were like again one of my survey findings. I found like I think I did the survey for junior strategists, and one of the strategists who was filling the survey, the person said like, there needs to be some kind of like common glossary or common vocabulary to the words or to these kind of phrases that we are using, how we are defining things in marketing and also in advertising. And of course, I wrote the post and it went kind of like in a mess because people said like there's no one way how to describe things or how to kind of define these terms. And I'm not on the same page, because I do believe that there's a way how people who are more like experts in the room, who can kind of give like different explanations, and from there we can drive to one common. But that's just my kind of background story about meanings and trying to define like, okay, what's your opinion about one particular definition? Because if we will invite in the room like, I don't know, 10 different strategists or no marketers, that will all have like different opinions about what brand positioning means.
Honestly, I got like, I mean, what is the question? What is the question really?
I come across this a lot. I've seen a lot of brand positioning decks, and a lot of them are pretty fluffy. They're not really based on any valid research. And I find the bigger the brand gets, the less positioning is actually valid anyway, because you're dealing with such a heterogeneous sort of market with light and heavy buyers. Like they all, every person's different. They perceive the brand in different ways. They don't perceive things that you think are important. And I find it all sort of regresses to like very basic reasons for purchasing, and the brand positioning side of thing gets ultimately lost unless it's a very clear sort of position, and they've hammered something home for many years. It's very clear what the brand stands for. I find it's sort of like a mute kind of investment a lot of times, and it's a way for people to avoid accountability. But
I guess
anyway.
it can be quite confusing because especially like startups, if indeed the category is quite blue ocean, then why is positioning important if you're not really positioning it against a competitive set? So, why even use positioning if you're a startup and everything is white space and you don't have any direct competition? But ironically, if you're in a overly mature category, then everybody's more or less the same because everyone is trying to cover as much of the category as possible. And you're kind of like just really fighting over little pieces of the pie in terms of market share. So I don't know, if you're Pizza Hut and Domino's or something like that, then what's the point of positioning? And I think when you go into what science has then wrought over since How Brands Grow, then also in How Brands Grow, he essentially says, well, he doesn't say positioning is completely useless, but he kind of like says the importance of positioning has been overestimated a little bit, like the importance of difference has been overestimated. And the fact that both those things have been overestimated is related, because they are overestimated for similar reasons, according to the kind of like How Brands Grow paradigm. I tend to go more with Ritson on that in this kind of bothism, where some of those concepts are very useful for strategy and marketing planning, even if their impact in isolation is not necessarily the end all and be all. And with positioning specifically, I find like on a very, very practical level, without going into anything, I find that you have to discuss positioning, because otherwise you just don't really know what you're going to do. You don't know really who you're going after and what you want them to think and what you're going to do about it. You can't really talk about those things without engaging with the question of positioning.
I would second that. I have a good answer, because this is my answer to funnels. And this came up in an interview I did with Gregory Kennedy in San Francisco, and he said he was a big fan of funnels. And I used to hate people saying, oh, sales funnels are important. I'm like, oh, this is like the dumbest thing ever, right? I've sort of come around only because, and I've come around with positioning as well for the same reason, and many other things that are technically maybe incorrect most of the time and maybe don't really exist. So there's no really solid scientific case for them, because like you said, the secondary effect of talking about them or addressing them actually washes out the thing that is important in the client relationship or a nugget of strategy or something like that. So it's not the primary action, it's the secondary actions that spill out that are really good. And he makes this good analogy around funnels in terms of like, I use it to talk to non-marketers, to the CFO, and they go, okay, well, what's this for? And he's like, that's top of funnel. And he's like, they get that we need to assign some portion of the budget to things that are like longer term, like value creators, rather than just harvesting sort of bottom of the barrel, high intense sort of sales leads all the time. And he's like, they understand that, even though technically the funnels kind of exist and maybe not. Like, so I think that was a good point.
Yeah, and you know what? I think that extends to other concepts in marketing. So in Why Does the Peddlers Sing, highly recommended, by the way, by Feldwick, goes into this whole rant about how brand essentialism is bad for business and bad for brands and almost like impractical. The idea that you're gonna capture the whole brand in a framework, and of course he gives quite a comical and well-deserved comical representation of how brand frameworks usually work. This is kind of like, 7 circles saying different things and a whole lot of fluffy language inside them. I mean, I read that bit of that book and I kind of like nodded along and felt the pain. And I am really against brand essentialism. However, if you're going to have a discussion about the brand and what you're going to try and do, you gotta give people some kind of a conceptual framework they can create a conversation around as a marketing team. And then I think it's very helpful to know what is the limit of the tool. And all tools have limitations. If you're going to try and screw in a screw with a hammer, that's a suboptimal tool. But you can, learn the limitations and the limitations of every tool, and then choose the right tool for the job, or do the job with a specific tool and don't expect that tool to become the end all and be all. But of course, the problem is marketing is kind of like a victim of its own marketing in that sense. When marketing is marketing, because the way to sell those tools to a client. And by the way, I've suffered greatly in my career because quite often I was unwilling to say about something, oh, this will be the solution to everything. This will be so transformative, kind of like, be a proper snake oil salesman. I would actually try and be more honest. And I can tell you there's a very small market for that in terms of agency leaderships. Very small market.
That's the whole reason they employ agencies half the time.
Who isn't willing to be a complete intellectual whore.
So the only thing I'd add to that is like all models are wrong, some are useful.
It's kind of like tragedy plus perspective. It's funny to you. I'm basically bleeding here.
Yeah. It's one of those things, isn't it? Like people will lean on something, lean on a helpful crutch if it gets them forwards. So if it's positioning, it's positioning. If it's something else, it's something else. The one thing that I do notice quite a lot is that I'm talking about sort of marketers as a whole. People will prefer to be in the weeds, like discussing positioning, for example, for 6 months, because that puts off the difficult decision about going out in the world and getting noticed, because that's really exposing. And because if you fail at getting noticed, then everyone in the business will go, well, you didn't get noticed. You suck. I'm going to stick the knife in and you're going to get the sack. So they'll sort of hide in detail because it's a much safer place.
Yeah, no, I agree with Paul. And I would say it's even worse. And specifically, so I do both B2C and B2B. And in B2B, it's sometimes even worse because B2B typically doesn't have the same time to market pressures of B2C. Yep. Like B2C, a retailer said, this will be on the shelf at this date. And now you got to make sure that once it's on the shelf, also the advertising is out, the whole marketing mix is out. In B2B, in many situations, the kind of like the deadline of the time to market is slightly more flexible. And then, not with startups, by the way, you have to show something, but with big corporate B2B mechanisms, like I'm not going to name a client I've had, which was one of the world's biggest investment banks, for example. So for them, what Paul just described, it was even more than that, because they would get into this loop, right? Because it's impossible to ask some of those questions without really starting to think about what makes the organization tick and what's the meaning of it all. And it's kind of like this navel gazing process. And then they would get to the end of that process. There would be something, I used to call it the meaning trap. Essentially, at the end of the process, at some point in the process, there'll be an answer that everyone is happy with finally, and everybody is willing to sign off. But then after a month or two of staring at that answer, people start feeling skeptical about it, because organizations in that sense are like humans, right? There's never like the ultimate answer to life, the universe, and everything. You kind of like figure it out, and then after a while you start doubting it and you're evolving it a little bit. And what happens in many of those organizations is that at that point, people go, oh, so probably this isn't the right brand strategy, and we need to start thinking about it again. And they will start a new brand strategy process without even realizing they haven't done anything with the old process. And one of the typical symptoms of that illness is when a client comes to me and says, well, we have a positioning statement and a vision, missions, and values, but we think we need to articulate our brand promise. I'm like, why do you think more strategic copy is the answer? It rarely is. And you cannot blame me that I don't like strategy, right? It's like I've made my entire life in it. But that is the issue. Humans just get in the way the whole time. Their humanity gets in the way.
Yeah. Maybe AI is the answer.
Oh, absolutely not.
Baiba, what do you think of this? Because I call this procrastination. Like there's various forms of strategic procrastination. Like at a small business level, it's obsessing with your logo design and getting business cards done. And like you should just be selling your product, getting it out there and getting feedback as soon as you can. Even startups, the same kind of thing. They get obsessed with building the product and being in stealth mode. I'm like, just get it out there. At least pre-sell the idea and do some testing, right? And I think the corporate version is kind of what you described, is like this sort of loop of never-ending brand positioning or brand strategy that never resolved itself.
And workshops, and then also all the participants become increasingly just kind of like bitter about those things, because they're sitting in workshops and they kind of feel, we've had that discussion before. We've had that discussion before. Why are we having it again? Nothing ever changes. A little bit like couples having the same argument again and again and again. You have to find a breakthrough, or things just get stagnated, and before you know it, there's a divorce. Sorry, the analogy broke down at some point, but I forget.
Yeah. That was a little bit close to therapy, that was, Uri.
Yeah.
Maybe the couples like to have arguments, so at the end they can resolve the tension in other ways. Maybe there's a silver lining here.
Yeah, well, that is a popular belief, but actually there's a huge survivorship bias in marketing.
Yeah.
Right? In the whole of marketing, we only look at success stories. I mean, on balance, generally speaking, marketing loves a success story, and there's a huge survivorship bias in almost like the whole discipline as a result of that. And most products fail, right? And of course, the extreme illness is thinking that big tech applies to everything. Like, what would Apple do?
Yeah.
When a client asks me, what would Apple do? I usually tell him, well, give me that kind of budget and I will tell you.
So this came up just yesterday. You know Vicky Ross, Paul? I'm guessing.
Of course.
Yeah. Okay. So she said on Twitter, I shouldn't say anything because I don't read Campaign, the publication Campaign. But what is the purpose and benefit of Turkey of the Week? And for people that don't know, Turkey of the Week is... Turkey is like a campaign that failed. So she's asking, like, what's the purpose of every week featuring a campaign that failed. And
No. Turkey of the Week isn't a campaign that failed necessarily. It's a campaign that creative directors think is bad.
Yeah.
oh,
That's not the same thing.
okay.
It's
So there's an opinionated.
The answer to that is it makes good gossip.
yeah.
That is the answer. That's why it's there. People like it. It's
Campaign can do
mean-spirited, and that's why people like it.
in the tabloids in the UK, in the tabloid newspapers, you have these kind of gossip columns where it's often under a pseudonym, or so, this kind of sleuth journalist will write almost like behind the curtain type stories, kind of getting the celebrity gossip type thing. It's mean. It's just really low. I mean, I can't stand Campaign. I'm so glad that they've gone out of print. It's not the trade press that it once was years ago. For me, I look at stuff like Turkey of the Week and I think, really, is that what we're doing? We're kind of stepping on somebody and kind of really trying to push them into the ground by saying your work is shit. That just feels. I got no time for that. I hate it.
Yeah. I mean, especially when we're dealing with such a high failure rate sort of like endeavor in the first place. Like even the best ideas fail at such a high rate that it's inevitable that most of your stuff will probably not land very well. So like, I suppose that's why there's so much survivorship bias, because there's so much failure. No one wants to admit to how much failure there actually is. It's kind of like politically swept under the piece. But when it's personal, you can learn a lot from failure, but I don't think it should be a personal attack.
Yeah, because one of the biggest things that I really like about the industry is that there is a big emphasis on trying to give credit to the people that have worked on bits of work. So if an ad goes out, it's very easy to find out what agency produced that work, the creative director, the copywriters, the production agency that made it, the director, the DOP, the people that were part of that work. It's really easy, and I think rightly it should be public knowledge who's made work. And it's not that I think people are shy of work that fails. It's just, why does someone who sits in an ivory tower, and it's a crumbling ivory tower, that's the reason why it's no longer in print, it's only digi, someone's gone, I'm going to be a bit of a and I'm going to say that works, and you just think, off.
But it's not ivory tower with Turkey of the Week, right? They basically get other creative directors to tell other creative directors that they think something is shit.
But that's the point, like the idea that Campaign have sort of proclaimed this is from like the idea that, well, we're Campaign, we're going to say that's a Turkey of the Week. Just think, I got no time for that. Fair play to Vicky.
I think it's a good idea
for calling it out.
What do you think, Baiba? You've been silent here.
Well, I didn't know about the Vicky's post, and I didn't know about this kind of local tradition in UK market that creative directors are basically kind of pointing fingers to each other's campaigns. But it feels nasty, I would say, especially nowadays that we are trying to at least be more empathetic towards each other, be more kinder towards each other, at least publicly, as far as we can. But on the other hand, some old traditions are still there, I would say.
That's fine. I just thought, because like System 1 did this Khan Turkey, which was like analysis of all the Khan entrances over a time period. And there's a list of Turkey campaigns or something. They did some analysis showing Turkey's actually rated higher than Khan winners or something on average around these dimensions in their system. And I just found that kind of interesting. I thought that the term was like just campaigns that bombed. This
may be one of the kind of colloquialisms of the UK. The idea of something being a Turkey is that it's rubbish. It's kind of like it stinks. If something's labelled as being a turkey, it's like it's not very good.
So not in a commercial sense, in terms of like opinionated sense, is that what you mean?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know kind of what the process is of Campaign when they want to label something Turkey of the Week. The thing that you mentioned there was that System 1 did some research to show, are the turkeys of the week that Campaign has labelled turkeys of the week, are they actually really turkeys, or are they good campaigns? And what you're saying is that the research they kind of pulled out was that based on their testing, a lot of the turkeys of the week perform quite well, which is not a good advert for the ad industry, is it? It's just unnecessary. And fair play to Vicky for calling it out.
Well, it's sort of sorry, just going back to Byron Sharps. I remember they did that study around were marketing professionals in a room, could they pick the winners of ads on stage? I think this is a presentation they did. Correct me if I'm wrong here. And so they have this big conference of like some of the best people in the world, and they couldn't pick the winners of the campaign when they showed them. They all got it sort of wrong or more wrong than the average respondent. So like I think that just shows our inability to really pick.
Yeah,
Winners.
there are other examples that I really like. I think Ritzen has a really good slide that I can probably dig out from somewhere. Ritzen has a very good slide where marketing people try to guess the adoption level of specific digital platforms and other channels, and how important they are. And
I know this
well,
one. Yes, this is
yeah.
the ones that I think they use versus, and they think everybody else uses by
Yeah,
virtue versus the ones that
and
actually have
it's not
viewership
like that.
numbers or
It's
something,
not
or
like that
usage
at
numbers.
all.
Yeah, huge
Yeah,
disconnect.
On that note, should we
Wrap it up.
end?
And what do you guys think?
yeah, that
It's up
sounds
to you.
good. If you can turn this into something tight and cool,
Oh yeah,
that would
yeah.
be amazing.
Master editor over here. Come on, I edit all my own stuff.
Yeah, you're so used to polishing a turd. That's
Well,
it.